ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellencies, distinguished participants, allow me to welcome you to the second annual International Conference on Futurology. My name is John Riadi and I have the pleasure of moderating this morning's session. We have three speakers for this morning. Each speaker will speak for about 10 to 15 minutes, followed by a Q&A and discussion in which we will be opening up the floor to your questions. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming the very gracious co-host of our conference, His Excellency Mr. Gita Wirjawan, Minister of Trade of the Republic of Indonesia. Any way you want. We're also honored to have with us today the chairman and founder of one of Indonesia's largest conglomerates, with holdings ranging from retail to media and from financial services to amusement parks, Mr. Chairul Tanjung, chairman of the National Economic Committee. From the United States, the third speaker of today's session, Markin of the National Intelligence Council. If we look around our world today, so much is changing. We're seeing unprecedented changes economically, politically, socially, militarily. It is no surprise that on a Saturday morning like this, we have over 1,000 people coming to hear us speak on a conference on futurology. So I'm pleased to invite our co-host, Minister Wirjawan, to deliver the opening presentation. Pak Gita, the stage is yours.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. First of all, as a co-host of the Futurology series, I want to welcome you to this event. I've been given 15 minutes to talk about things that I think would be relevant to all of us Indonesians and hopefully many of you distinguished guests from outside Indonesia. I want to talk about the history of Indonesia, and I want to talk about where we are today, and I want to talk about where we could be and where we want to be. If we go back a few billion people globally in hundreds of years, in the first millennium, Indonesia was able to put a mark on the global landscape by way of the supremacy and the prominence of a number of dynasties. I think one prominent one that comes up is that of the Shailendra. This was in the 7th century, which I've told many people in Indonesia and outside, where they were able, or we were able to build the largest Buddhist temple in the world. It's a structure, it's a construct that is equipped with about 6 square platforms that's topped by circular platforms and embellished with over 2,500 reliefs and hundreds of Buddha statues. And this was basically the manifestation of not only Indonesia's economy, but also diplomacy, culture, and to a lot of extent, geopolitics. And for a few hundred years, a few 100 million people later, about 7 centuries to be almost exact, Indonesia went through a reawakening. This was in the 14th century, where we had the brilliance of a patih, or a prime minister by the name of Gajah Mada. Gajah Mada was probably one of the most exemplary servants of the public, who assisted the then king by the name of Hayam Wuruk, and they were able to manifest Indonesia's economic prowess and geopolitical prowess, cultural, social, diplomatic, and what have you. Thereafter, Indonesia kind of hibernated for hundreds of years, and till the world grew in population by a few more hundreds of million. Then we kind of had a wake-up call. That wake-up call, which was precipitated by a few events of geopolitical importance, it took place in 1945, when Indonesia became independent, and it marked the end of colonialism and imperialism. Indonesia was able to show its teeth, its strength, and its desire. And it marked the beginning of a new journey. Decades later, the world was about as bipolar as we had seen it, or as many people wanted it. But then the Cold War ended about 20 years ago, when that bipolarity ended. The intuition at that time was that the world was going to be singularized, but it actually became more multipolar. Emerged the centers of power in India, in the Middle East, in Africa, in Brazil or South America, and in Asia by way of China and India and what we call ourselves Southeast Asia. Kind of looks and sounds familiar with what happened in the last 2 millennia. And Indonesia was able to grow economically, politically, although we went through some trials and tribulations. 1997 was probably the most testing trial. I was there as a banker. My salary dropped by 85% in real terms. I felt it, I sensed it, and it was felt by millions of Indonesians. We were politically, economically, diplomatically, socially, culturally moribund. But somehow we were able to wake up, and we went through an experiment called democracy. Democracy was just getting started in Indonesia with the transitioning of times and governments under the leadership of Habibie, Gusdur, Megawati, and the maturing process just got better and better until President SBY got elected in 2004, the first ever directly elected president, who basically took on whatever took place before him and tried to shape the country. And this was in 2004, which is in the 21st century. It's funny, because if we look back 2,000 years, Indonesia seems to be projecting its prominence every 7 centuries. It's what I call the cycle of 7. The 7th century, the Shalendras, the 14th century, the Majapahits, and the 21st century. This is, I think, the time for us. And we sit on the back of, I think, a pretty damn good economic footprint and foundation, whereby we have sorted out our monetary issue, we have sorted out our fiscal issues, we have sorted out a good chunk of our political issues, where I think we can leapfrog going forward. The picture up there is what I think will define our future. And this is what I think will define our future. What will define where we can go, where we want to be. The demographic bonus is such that we are what we call ourselves the Selena Gomez generation. I used to say to Justin Bieber, but the girls got mad. If we start off with $1 trillion today, in terms of our economic size, and we were to grow just at 5% real growth per year, and add to that 5% inflation rate, and if we were to assume linearity and grow it for 20 years, this is the accumulation of our economic pie in the next 20 years. It's staggering. $60 trillion. That's how much cake. The catch is, there is no disruptions, whether it's in the form of A bomb explosion, a tsunami, an earthquake, or a political blow-up that could derail our future. Now we take a look at the next. This is where we could be 20 years from today. Our economy could grow potentially to 7 trillion US dollars. And it could be the 7th largest economy in the world. This is not my uncle or my aunt saying, this is McKinsey. And we didn't pay them to write this report. It's funny, the number 7 is a magical number. 7th century, 7 centuries later, 7 centuries later, and 20 years from today, we can look forward to being the 7th largest economy by being a $7 trillion economy. And I happen to be 47 years old. How's that? I think this is a great future. We're going to have potentially 135 million people in the middle class who are going to be consumptive. We're going to have about $1.8 trillion worth of market that year in 2030, or 2031, or 2032, depending on when you start. You can start in 2010 or you can start in 2012. A good chunk of our GDP is going to be in the cities. We can have the necessary confidence for our own diplomacy, for our own cultural achievements, for our own social achievements, for our own geopolitical achievements, and what have you. And it's sort of like a blank piece of paper. And we're going to give you that pencil, and you can draw it. You can draw whatever drawing you want to be on that picture, or that blank piece of paper. There's going to be about 300 million people 20 years from today, most of whom are going to be youthful and young. I think we've got to be big-hearted about where we want our kids and grandkids want to be. I think we can do it. We were moribund just 15 years ago, now we're relevant. How are we going to do that? Growing. Imagine if there's some degree of exponentiality in the number of people who are going to be paying tax. If we assume that linearity, the government is going to be collecting enough money, and whatever money it's going to be collecting in the next 20 years, the sum of which will be about 12 trillion US dollars. Typically, the government spends about 20% of its budget on education. That's basically how the government has been mandated by the Constitution, which was amended, that we have to spend about 20% of our budget on education. If we take 20% of that 12 trillion US dollars, it amounts to about 2.4 trillion US dollars. That's a lot of potatoes. Now, assuming that it cost about $50,000 to send somebody to any of the Ivy League schools in the US, that's the number. We can send 48 million Indonesians to the Ivy League schools. Assuming it's only going to cost $20,000 to send one person to any of the best universities in Indonesia, we can send 120 million Indonesians. The sad part is, we don't have as many PhDs as China does, as many PhDs as India does, on a relative and absolute basis. But the happy part is, we're going to have the money to do it. We're going to have the money to make sure that these millions of people will have the opportunity. It's not just about having an equal consequence, but it's about having an equal opportunity for everybody in Indonesia. And there is no reason for us not to be able to produce that consequence, that opportunity. I think we can get there. I'm optimistic. As long as we take ownership of where we want to be. The problem is, when I go around Indonesia and give lectures at the universities, is most Indonesians, they don't know how big they are. They don't know that our economy is twice the size of that of Saudi Arabia. They don't know that our economy is 4 times the size of Malaysia. They don't know that our economy is 5 times the size of Singapore's. They don't know that our economy is the 15th largest in the world. Now, there is this concept, bangga berbangsa. Kita tidak bisa bangga berbangsa kalau kita tidak mengetahui kebesaran kita sendiri. If we know how big we are, how relevant we are, that we're the 15th largest economy in the world, I think that's a damn good start. That's a start of a journey where we can start thinking big. And it takes thinking big to produce the necessary entrepreneurs, the necessary policymakers, the necessary scientists, the necessary academicians. You can't think big if you don't know that you're actually already big. And I think this can be game changed. Look at where we are in terms of our ranking in math, in how wired we are, how innovative we are. The number of patents that were issued in 2010 for Indonesia was only 3,500, give and take. 5,500 patents in 2010. You know how many patents were issued for China and Japan? About 350,000 each. That's because they've taken a view on where they want to put the money. We need to take a view on our political stickiness. Today, there's a wide diversity of our politics. Tens of parties. My view is, as we become more and more educated, I think we can not only make more choices, but I think those choices are going to be more streamlined. Whether it's an ideological choice, or an economic choice, or what have you. And there's no reason for this to be not to be further consolidated. The future of us is there. Let's not blow it. I'm here to talk about futurology, but I'm here to basically let you know that we are in a position to do whatever we can. But we can only do it if we're realistic about it. We need to recalibrate our ambitions upward, but we need to recalibrate our realism. Because with realism, I think we can even better and faster achieve our ambitions. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for your time and patience. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.